we have a good number, so that doesn't dump everybody in at the same time. So that's why I want to just give a moment. But I hope everybody's having a wonderful day. This is day 2 of the Global MedTech Regulatory Trends True Quality Summit series. If you missed the previous session around product development, you can watch the recordings on demand. Those will be on the Greenlight Guru Academy page. So we're excited to have you join for this presentation, QMSR Harmonization, the good, the bad, and the ugly. This session will run for about 35 minutes with 10 minutes allotted for questions. If any questions come up throughout the presentation, please ask them in the chat on the right-hand side. There's a Q&A box as well. It definitely encourage you to use that. We will get to as many of those as possible. At the end of this session, remember to log into the Greenlight Guru Academy to receive your certificate for attending today's virtual event. Presenting today is Syed Khorashahi. If I said that correctly, Syed has more than 30 years of experience leading research and development teams in all aspects of developing safety critical medical devices. He's been with RCA for over 9 years, and he currently leads the medical device segment of the Regulatory Compliance Associates, which is a Nelson Labs company. He's responsible for developing and maintaining the primary processes that support the consulting service delivery of RCA's medical device clients to meet the global medical device regulations. Prior to RCA, Syed held leadership positions at Covidien, Medtronic, Baxter, and Beckman Coulter. So he has an extensive background in medical device product development, quality system, regulatory affairs, mergers and acquisitions, engineering, business strategies. He's been around a little while and he knows what he's talking about. In addition, Syed has significant domain expertise, not only in FDA and EU regulations, but also in the development of medical device software systems. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to him. Let me share my screen though. We had a little bit of technical difficulties, so I will be sharing the presentation, and then we'll get started. All right, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, just let me know when I need to change slides.
Yeah, thank you very much, Etienne, for the intro. Can we go to the next slide, please? All right, so today we will talk about the new proposed rule, the new quality management system regulation, and we'll talk a little bit about the background of, how did it come all about, an overview of the proposed rules, what are the similarities and differences between the 21 CFR Part 820 and the ISO 13485 from the FDA perspective, and what are the implications once this rule gets finalized. And then we'll look at some of the benefits of the new rules for patients, manufacturers, and FDA. And then we'll look at what it takes to actually go ahead and implement the changes that FDA is proposing. Next, please. Just a little bit about RCA. Regulatory Compliance and Associate is a life science consulting business, and we are involved in all different aspects of the regulatory and quality, from regulatory affairs, anything to do with submissions and pre-submissions, post-submissions, with compliance assurance, with quality assurance, any sort of remediation of any of the quality and regulatory aspects of the product. And also we are involved in a strategic consulting. Next slide, please. Okay, so FDA finally went ahead and published the new proposed rule, which is an amendment to the 21 CFR Part 820, and called it QMSR, Quality Management System Regulations. And they're incorporating the ISO 13485-2016 by reference to amend the 21 CFR Part 820. The proposed rule will be the first amendment to QSR since 1996. And I use that term QSR because everybody else uses it, but in reality, QSR is Quality System Records. And nowhere in the FDA terminology you would see them use it as QSR. They themselves call it QS regulations, and they call the Quality System Records the QSR. But it's a vernacular that has been used by all of us in the industry. So I just wanted to mention that to begin with. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? So some background. So this whole concept of the harmonization started based on an announcement in 2018, and initially FDA was going to basically roll it out sometime in 2019, and they're falling a little bit behind, and then COVID came in, and then the priorities changed a little bit. But this effort has been going on for a long time, and FDA has been involved with the Global Harmonization Task Force, with the medical device regulation forums, and then the MDSAP, which is basically the basis of how they came about with this whole concept of convergence. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to just bring a little bit about the GHDF, which was formed back in '93 and basically was out there for the purpose of global convergence of regulatory practices to make sure the safety and effectiveness of the devices. And the areas that they focused on were basically on the safety aspects, on the vigilance, and then the post-market surveillance, on design controls, and then how the system would be audited. So that was the initial effort of FDA being one of the founding members of the GHDF. Next slide. So then in 2011, basically, the GHDF was replaced by IMDRF, which was a voluntary group of regulators that wanted to build a strong foundation that GHDF had built on, and then work on further efforts for harmonization. Obviously, they have done a lot of work and have a lot of guidance documents on some of the newer technologies, whether it's AI, ML, cybersecurity, things that weren't covered before, and also in terms of submissions and clinical evaluations, et cetera. But our focus today is going to be on the quality system, but there's a lot more things that would need to be harmonized. I think on the clinical evaluation side, for example, ICH, the good clinical practices is a good starting point, for all of the work that is being done around the world. Next slide. Another program that was out by IMDRF is MDSAP. So MDSAP, the Medical Device Single Audit Program, which US is one of the 5 countries, along with Japan, Canada, Australia, and Brazil, was an effort to basically bring in some benefits to not only the regulators, but also to the medical device companies. Next slide, please. So some of the benefits of for the regulatory authorities is basically, how could they make it more flexible and efficient in terms of working across the different regulations. So basically the whole concept was that use the ISO 13485 as the basis, and then the country specific requirements also would be included as a part of the MDSAP. And there's, like in terms of being able to have, let's just say, one audit that would be acceptable across countries, it just helps the regulators in terms of how many people they get involved in this, and then being able to also help on the other side, the patients. So let's go to the next slide. So for the manufacturers, as opposed to having hosting multiple regulatory authorities to come in and audit them, this basically helps reduce the number of times that they come in, and also it's basically, like if FDA goes in and then, brings up some issues and problems, but doesn't find something else. And then Anvisa goes in and finds some problems that FDA didn't find. And this is trying to solve that, to just make sure that the manufacturers understand a common set of languages and what they're looking for. And then the auditing organization, when they go in, they know exactly what to look for. And the report is shared across all these regulatory authorities. With that, it's, there's obviously predictability and outcome, and then it's good for the manufacturers to just deal with one as opposed to multiple of these. Now, Canada is the only country that requires it, but the other countries basically take this into account. Like FDA might, basically not do routine inspection based on the report that it gets for the MDSAP audits. So next, please. So the bottom line is that, I brought up the Global Harmonization Task Force, the MDSAP and IMDRF, because that's where FDA basically experienced using ISO 13485, and then how it relates to what they do and how they relied on those reports from MDSAP, for example, to help them make this decision of incorporating the ISO 13485 as a part of the QMSR. With that in mind, the way FDA is approaching this is basically, one, they are going to keep the 21 CFR Part 820, which has like 10 subparts, and then they'll change some of the sections and reference basically the ISO 13485 for the rest of the stuff. We will talk about some of the similarities and some of the differences between them and the next slides, but the bottom line is that in the new amended 820, they will retain some of the specific definitions to just make sure that it is in sync with and aligned to the FD&C Act. And then they will have some requirements beyond ISO 13485 that the new amended quality management system regulation will have as part of the 820. And they might change some of the definitions, but in general, if they haven't changed it, then all of the definitions for ISO 13485 will stay. And they will have to do some also certain concepts and organizations in there that it is unique to FDA to just make sure that it's in sync with what the FD&C Act are. Basically, if you look at the bigger picture, so we have 820 subpart A to O, right? And they only are going to have in subpart A, for example, they'll add 820.7, which is incorporation by reference. So they would basically set up how they're going to use ISO 13485 2016 in particular. And then in subpart B, they're adding a couple of more sections. They're adding 820.35, which talks about controls and records, which is a little bit different. They'll add a subpart 820.45, which is device labeling and packaging. And we'll talk about some of these. But the basic idea is that all the other subparts of the 820 is going to be referencing what ISO 13485 has. Next slide, please. So the FDA 21 CFR Part 820 was basically established back in 1978. And then in the 90s, FDA started looking at some of the recalls and noticed that a lot of them are attributed to design issues and design problems. That's why they went ahead and they did their last major amendment to 820 in 1996, which went into effect in 97 with the introduction of the design controls. And it hasn't been changed. It has definitely passed the test of time, and still it's very, very much similar to what ISO 13485 is. And when we're talking about ISO 13485, which is a voluntary standard that was first published in 1996, and then we have had a couple of revisions, including the major revision in 2016. So it's definitely have been updated compared to FDA 21 CFR Part 820 that hasn't changed since 96. So, and just one other little point about the ISO 13485, which basically even EU does not mandate certification of ISO 3085, but they definitely prefer it as a way to show compliance. And personally, I don't know a whole lot of people in class 2, class 3 medical devices that are shipping to EU that are not ISO 13485 certified. With that, FDA, as a part of the transition or convergence to ISO 13485, did publish a similarities and differences between these two quality systems that I'm just going to go through a couple of examples of that. Next slide, please. Okay, so basically FDA, as I said, based on their experience with, looking at the MDSAP audit reports and them being a part of the IMDRF, and prior to that, the Global Harmonization Task Force, etc., have been looking at the ISO 13485. And then in general, basically, they're saying that the level of assurance in firms' quality management system and ability to consistently manufacture devices to be safe and effective basically is, similar for both the 21 CFR Part 820 and ISO 13485. Now, obviously, ISO 13485 being a new and more updated version has a little bit more detail, and it's more comprehensive from that perspective. And as I said before, they had used some of the voluntary audit reports back from 2012, and the fact that they were part of the MDSAP as a precursor to reaching these conclusions. But when you look at all the different elements of 21 CFR Part 820 and ISO 13485, basically FDA is saying that it's substantially similar. They're not saying it's the same, but it's substantially similar when you look at the intent, scope, and requirements of all these different parts of ISO 13485 versus the 21 CFR Part 820. I mean, you still have management control, you have document controls, record controls, you have design controls, manufacturing controls, and the rest of the things that are part of it. They're basically substantially equivalent. Next slide. However, with that being said, there are some differences since FDA wants to also be, to make sure that the ISO 13485 is in alignment with the FD&C Act. So with that in mind, there are some of the definitions that FDA will be keeping. There are some of the terminology that might be changing. For example, FDA uses the MWR, or the management with executive responsibility, but if you look at the ISO 13485, it is top management. So they're going to change the terminology from that perspective. But they'll, but there are some of the other terms that they will keep, but that would be all covered as part of the amended 820 regulations. So if you look at 820, risk management was basically part of 820.30G validation. It wasn't part of, I mean, although FDA has come up with the total product lifecycle management and talks about that, but in terms of the 820, it wasn't a part of the whole life cycle of the product development from the inception to the sunsetting of the product, which ISO 13485 basically has that incorporated as a part, and FDA is definitely moving that way, and the risk management would be one of the areas that would be a lot more emphasized also moving forward. But also there are some specifics that ISO 13485, for example, talks about traceability of implantable devices, but FDA is basically talking about adding the life-sustaining. So there will be some minor differences from that perspective also that FDA will highlight. And then some of the other terms, and then what FDA has, like labeling, manufacturer, product, etc. What their definition of a product or a finished device and etc. is. All of those, if there are any changes, FDA will have those as a part of the new amended 820. Next slide, please. So what are the implications for medical device companies? Obviously, the organizations that were shipping beyond the US to other countries are ISO 13485 compliant, and almost all of them do have ISO 13485 certification. However, if there are companies that are not shipping globally and they're only shipping in the US, their quality system might be aligned with the 21 CFR Part 820 and what its terminology and then what the requirements are. Those people definitely have a little bit more work to do to become more aligned and compliant to ISO 13485. So regardless, right now, even the companies that have a more global presence, basically their quality system is referencing terminology for both FDA and for ISO 13485. And that whole, how they reference, how they use those different terminology and what they do if there's anything different, etc. It's all the things that when they have to do the move with this alignment or with the move from FDA to move towards ISO 13485, those things have to be modified. It makes life a lot easier, but there's work to be done. Next slide, please. So one of the areas that is FDA basically as a part of announcing the new proposed rule was the concept of how are they going to go ahead and audit. Obviously in the past, they used the QSIT model, but now the auditing of ISO 13485 is a little bit different from that perspective, and they're just trying to figure this out. All we know is that it's going to be different, but how different or how it's going to get done I think we have to wait for FDA to come back for that. But obviously, in the new model, since the ISO 14971 or risk management would be part of the whole product lifecycle, that will be emphasized to look at all those aspects when the inspections occur from the FDA perspective. But if we look at the bigger picture, obviously ISO 13485, you have a registrar or the notified body for people who are also EU MDR compliant, that you have someone else, a third party, to come in, and they might be your registrar that do your certification, and then you have that whole certification, recertification, and then the surveillance audits, and then you have that whole mechanism in place. But FDA obviously does not have any plan of either outsourcing that or being in the business of certification, or even not auditing you if you're certified. So it's just going to continue the way it is, with some changes to how they plan to do the inspection in light of the fact that now they are moving towards ISO 13485. Next slide, please. Okay, so what's next? Next slide. So FDA basically published the new proposed rule back in February. The comment stage ended in May. There were a lot of feedback and with this, and now basically FDA has to go back, see how much of what that feedback is going to basically they need to incorporate. They need to figure out how to basically deal with the QMS review when the pre-submission notifications occur, and then also, as we talked about, how are they going to evaluate, or how is their inspections? And obviously there's a lot of education, a lot of things that FDA would do to just bring up the industry. One of the things that the industry, the feedback was, because of the time frame FDA is trying to do, was how long after the rule is finalized will it would the companies require to implement the new QMSR, I'm sorry. Let's go to the next slide, please. So in terms of adoption, once the rule is finalized, FDA basically was asking for 1 year to implement after the rule is finalized. However, the industry was asking for 2 or even 3 years of transition period to get there. Even though the changes that are being done, moving from the existing 820 to the new revised 820, are not huge, but it's good for the industry to start thinking about how to transition and start thinking about what are all the changes that they have to do. Obviously, it's no different than when people moved from, for example, MDD to MDR, where you did a gap assessment of where you are, what the changes are, where you have to go, and then implemented that to be able to be ready for when the rule actually is finalized. And then the sooner you start, the better off you are with that. So one of the issues are that there's definitely, the rule isn't finalized, and there are a little bit of stuff that is in movement. And in the next slide, we'll talk about some of these concerns. Can we just move to the next slide, please? Oh, this is the benefits. So it's the following slide. So here are some of the benefits of the new rule for patients, manufacturers, and actually FDA, not patients. But it's about the convergence. So now, you don't have to worry as much about, catering to FDA and catering to the countries that require you to be in compliance with ISO 13485. And FDA did a study of, and then they have an estimate of what it would, companies would save with not having to deal with these, keeping basically their quality system and then all the activities that happen as a part of the quality management system. For over 10 years, they're estimating it will be about $500 million of savings. And also based on the work that FDA has done over the years on working with ISO 13485 and the flexibility and the comprehensiveness of ISO 13485, they believe that it will benefit the patients to get devices out more efficiently, because it's a lot more comprehensive. It has been in practice for a while, etc. And with this convergence, it makes life a lot easier for the manufacturers. And with it, as I said, even though FDA's quality system regulations have withstood the test of time, but the bottom line is that the ISO 13485 is more comprehensive. It's been updated, and it's it addresses, for example, this whole concept of the risk-based approach, and it incorporates the risk management throughout the whole life cycle of the product, and all of those would help to make the new revised or amended 820 more robust. And then obviously not having to deal with the 820 and ISO 13485, it will help the manufacturers, because now they can use basically very similar terminology, same for most parts, but then there's some differences that are minor that they have to deal with the new rule. Also, we talked about the risk management, and then the fact that that is going to help overall the patients, the manufacturers, to have a better idea of where to focus their effort, which is based on the risk and based on where it matters the most for everybody, and that's going to be definitely a benefit. Next, please. So some of the concerns right now, I think we just, the fact that we don't know what the changes are and how the companies will be evaluated, that's, because that's the key for being able to prepare for the FDA inspections. That's one of the concerns that we just have to wait and see how FDA does that and what changes they make to the existing QSIT to make it a little bit more aligned, but also at the same time make sure that they meet their expectation at FDA and CACT. And it's also about the clarity on how the regulatory requirements of the rest of the FDA, besides just the quality system, and how that whole thing would work, because there will be some differences from the ISO 13485, and I think that those are some of the concerns that we have. Next slide, please. All right, so this is, if there are any questions and that sorts of stuff, we would like to open up the floor for any questions about the move to quality management system regulations and the new proposed rule.
Great, thank you so much, Sayed. We do have some good questions. I would kind of like to start with one that I thought was a really good question. Let me see if I can find it real quick. From Kathy. The old QSR allowed manufacturers to keep their internal audit findings out of the purview of the FDA. Now that the QMSR will be aligned with ISO 13485, will FDA now have full access to our internal audit findings and quality management review contents?
Yeah, that's a good question. I didn't see anything new in there, but if you go back to what the FDA practice is, there's a reason why they want your internal audits to be effective. Hence, they want you to basically point out what the issues and problems are. Even though they could, even in the existing regulation, they could ask for it, but the practice or the best understanding is that they are not asking for it. I don't know the answer to the question. I haven't seen anything specific to that with the new rule, but I would venture to guess still what was there before exists, in a sense that they want people to be able to bring up any issues and problems in their internal audit and make their quality system more effective, and not have a need to show that to the auditors, to the inspectors from FDA.
Okay. One of the other questions from Gestolf. Does the FDA also adopt the standards reference in ISO 1345, like ISO 11607, 10993, et cetera? Kind of speaking to those consensus standards, how will, 1345, how will they handle those standards reference within?
Obviously, FDA has their own list of recognized standards and et cetera. And then from that perspective, that whole mechanism would work. And, ISO 13485, ISO 14971, for example, has been not only a consensus standard, but also a recognized standard in FDA. And that's definitely, it's going to continue to be, that way.
Okay. And I think I read this in the QMSR proposed document, but I can't remember. Do you know how how they're going to recognize or how they're going to handle future revisions of 1345? Is it revision dependent? Do you remember? Yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, right now, basically, what they're thinking is that this is all about evaluating, looking at the ISO 1345 2016 and aligning it with that. So future revisions are not going to be automatic. It will require standards. Obviously, once FDA adopts the ISO 1345, they also have leverage on what changes happen on ISO 1340. So it's going to be a coordinated effort. However, the bottom line is that, yes, FDA will evaluate and will incorporate by reference as needed. This is 820 that we're talking about, because they're going to be revising 820, and then, as we know, 820 doesn't change that often. So there will be some effort to do that, and then obviously, as I said, FDA will have leverage on what changes, and then making sure that those changes that are happening in ISO 13485 before even they're published, that they're in line with what FDA has, and then they have a say in that. So it would make life a lot easier from that perspective. But yeah, this is a specific to the 2016 version of ISO 13485.
Okay, yeah, then that makes sense. Okay, one other question. This is from L. Johnson. What percentage of U.S. device manufacturers are not ISO compliant? How many companies will be significantly impacted? Do you have any insight?
I do not have any insight in that, but I would venture to guess these are smaller companies that that do this in the U.S. only. But I don't know what the numbers or what the statistics are.
Sure. Okay. Alice just kind of made a comment. I don't know if you want to comment on it. I've been told that your management reviews will be considered fair game during surveillance activities. Any insight there?
Unfortunately, I do not have an insight on that.
Yeah, it kind of probably goes back to what you were saying earlier about the consensus standards and how things previously, likely some of that will be maintained, the approach. Okay, let's see. We had another question. See if I had written it down. Labeling and packaging is one of the things that is not just being adopted across the board. There seems like Part 8, the FDA wants to add a little bit of, make it a little bit more robust from from the FDA side. Can you comment on that? Yeah.
Yeah, no, they do have, if you look at the proposed rule, they have introduced a new section, 820.45, and that covers exactly that. They have specific, basically from their perspective, shortcomings in ISO 1345 that they're basically putting in some more language and some more requirements to just make sure that FDA's perspective is covered for devices that are coming into the US. Yeah, there is a new section, and then it explains exactly how that is going to work.
Now, some of those things that are changing, you know, whether it's the new section, the 820.45 and so forth, adding that language, so if we take ISO 1345 out of the picture for just a moment, and we have, okay, what is being added to Part 820, are those things going to impact companies significantly, or is it just clarifying what's already sort of been understood? Do you have any, can you comment on that, or?
Yeah, mostly it's the latter part, but there are some differences and there are some requirements like this labeling aspects, like the what we talked about, the traceability. You know, ISO 1345 is just implantable. Here it's not only implantable but also life-sustaining. You know, some of these life-sustaining devices, as you know, may not be a PMA device, and they might be 510K, for example. They're not implantable. So there are some of those differences that would require you to keep track of things and then have records, etc. But in general, it's about, you know, just identifying those differences. But keep in mind that FD&C, you know, basically supersedes 820. It's the same way that, you know, like when ISO 1345 comes in, it's all about the act, and it's all about, you know, the rest of the what FDA has, that those supersede even, you know, the existing 820. So, and that will be the case, continue to be the case.
Okay. This one's from an anonymous attendee. Is ISO 1345 certification required for the US market? You had already answered in your presentation, no. There's an addition to this question. If it is not required, as long as you meet all the requirements, is there any advantage for ISO 1345 certification if in the US, if the US is the only intended market? Any comment?
Yeah, that's an interesting question in a sense that FDA obviously said that they're not in the business of certifying, and they're not going to basically eliminate audits or their inspections with the ISO 1345 inspection reports, audit reports, et cetera, right? So then that begs the question that is being asked, is that what's the benefit of that? On the surface, it doesn't look like, I mean, if you're not shipping to EU and other countries that basically more or less by default, you need to be ISO 1345 certified, even though it's not required, but you need to be, then that question is not, you know, a big deal. And I, you know, right now, the way they're looking at it, it doesn't really buy you anything, but I have a suspicion that it will definitely have a positive impact in my mind if somebody's ISO 1345 certified. It's not that it eliminates the routine inspections, etc., but at least it gives them a good idea that, hey, there are other people that have looked at this before. But formally, I don't think, you know, at least based on what we have seen, there's nothing that FDA is saying that, hey, we're not going to do this because you're certified.
You make a really good point. So if the FDA is truly adopting that risk-based approach, and they have this list of companies that need to be inspected, some are saying we're ISO 1345, you know, compliant. Others are saying we're actually certified, or they can show that certification. That risk-based approach makes sense. Who are they going to pick first to inspect?
Exactly.
So, yeah. Okay, let me look through the questions. I think you answered most of the general ones. Let's see here. There's another question about, there's a few questions about MDSAP. Will the new QMSR rule have any impact to the MDSAP approach? And if so, any insight to that?
Not that I know of. I mean, the bottom line is that the MDSAP program not only took care of complying with ISO 1345, but also it has the specific country requirements for those 5 countries that are currently member of the MDSAP program. So it's already, I mean, I can't see anything, but I haven't read anything about whether there are any differences from that perspective. But you know, at the end of the day, it's just like, if you look at, for example, MDSAP, it's all about, you know, the vigilance and reporting and then differences from country to country. But all of those are already established. And then when they came up with the MDSAP program, that's already there. So I don't see what else, but I haven't heard anything from that perspective either.
Okay, great. Well, really appreciate your insight and all of your sharing your experience, your expertise here today, especially on this topic that everybody's interested in. It's going to impact a lot of different people. I'll ask one last question. And so that time, the 1 year versus 2 to 3 years that the industry asked for, do you think that's actually necessary? Maybe that's an opinion. We're all going to have different opinion, but or do you think that's, you know, Parkinson's law is going to take effect? You know, however much time that the work is going to fill that amount of time. What are your thoughts? Do we need 2 years? Can we do it in 1 year?
It's the latter, right? In my personal opinion. Now, I'm sure there's a reason why people are asking for more than 1 year, but on the surface, it doesn't look like it's going to be a huge effort. And as you said, if it's 2 years, people are delaying it. I mean, we have seen this basically movie before. You know, if you look at EU MDD to MDR, that's a huge effort. But the concepts are the same in a sense that people basically delayed it, and then
right.
More than likely, we're not going to even meet that deadline by the 2024, and that has to be extended. So yeah, I mean, that is going to be, from my perspective, is going to be more than likely the case where I don't think it's unreasonable, but you got to have a deadline. It doesn't matter if it's 2 years or 1 year, and people delay it until they have to do it.
Right. Okay. Yeah, just curious about that. Looks like I think we answered most of the questions, if not all. If we did not answer a question, please reach out to us, reach out to Sayed. I'm sure he'd love to hear from you. We are at time. Really appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much for your presentation, Sayed. Someday we're going to have to compare books on your bookshelf. I'd love to know what you read, but maybe not today. The next session will be starting shortly. We'll be hearing from Danny Crew about the MDSAP certification, successes and failures. A lot of you asked about the MDSAP. We're about, the next session is on that, so definitely stick around for us. Join us at the top of the hour. If you're not able to join us, I hope you have the good rest of the day and enjoy the rest of the virtual summit. Thank you all. We'll see you later. Thank you, Sayed.
All right, thank you.